And I'm going to give my TLDR very briefly. Everything in that little list there is the stuff that I like and the stuff that I dislike about the little manifesto here. There's lots of things we need to see the patch notes for. So obviously this isn't final. This is just my sort of ideas from this, but obviously this is all subject to change. Again, most of it I agree with. I just don't agree with the implementation. And now let's kind of get into the longer side of things. Right. Starting with traps. Now, keep in mind that because of the instant skills, Detonating Mines is instant, and that is important because they've decided to nerf trap throwing speed, multi-trap, plus trap, and minefield. Even with the minefield nerf, miners are substantially more powerful with the instant Detonating Mines. Mines, I think, are going to be meta as fuck going into the next patch. Now, traps were very powerful. Traps had crazy buffs, so most people are kind of fine with the trap nerfs. I'm fine with the trap nerfs, but I really dislike the trap throwing speed nerf. Trap throwing speed was actually nerfed by the trap rework, and the reason why trap throwing speed is kind of a thing is because they also crazy buffed the maximum cap of traps. By nerfing the throwing speed of traps, you make traps feel clunkier. If you want to nerf the damage, I would say just nerf the damage rather than nerf the enjoyability. I don't like the clunkiness. We don't know the true extent to this, obviously, because we haven't got the final patch notes. But yeah, I would just nerf the raw damage. They've also said they're going to be increasing the damage of some trap and mine skills, and they give the examples of lightning trap and fire nova mines, which also implies that there are some trap skills they don't think are doing too much damage, which makes most people assume it's basically arc trap does too much damage, and then fire trap maybe does too much single target damage. And I think the far cleaner solution to that would be to nerf arc, because arc does ridiculous damage across the board, and to nerf the 200% damage effectiveness of fire trap, rather than to nerf all traps and then have to rebuff traps. It just seems like a very haphazard kind of fix. And yes, also, since when I say we should nerf arc, people say, but Tarke, what about the other kinds of arc? Well, arc totems are still very powerful. Arc Poet's Pen is still very powerful. Self-cast Arc is okay. If you wanted to buff raw self-cast, so not Poet Pen Arc, and by extent Arc Totems, you could nerf the damage, but then buff the cast speed. That would nerf Arc Poet's Pen, Arc Mines, Arc Traps, while buffing Arc Totems and buffing raw Arc. They've said they want to buff spell casting itself. That could be done by removing the damage penalty on Spell Echo. That would be actually really good. If they remove the damage penalty on Spell Echo, you would quite substantially buff a lot of self-cast builds while not buffing the current self-cast builds which see use. So for example, Blade Vortex wouldn't get buffed by that change. Any of the Ignite builds wouldn't get buffed by that change. Any of the channeled builds, which do damage but are clunky, wouldn't get buffed by that change. So I think that is kind of where they should be going, rather than nerfing trap throwing speed. Trap throwing speed, don't nerf it, right? Instant skills. Instant skills is amazing. It's one of my favorite things about the new change. Some people have been worried that we're not going to have enough like raw like binds available or sockets in our gear. If you already did use, for example, a faster casting increased duration Val Grace, or a faster casting increased duration phase run, or whatever, because these are instant now, you don't need that faster casting support anymore. So you could now, take that socket out and put in another skill, so you could gain a Molten Shell or whatever. So I wouldn't be worried too much about raw sockets unless you're a summoner player, for example. But key binding is always a big issue. The spell block change, they've basically separated. Most spell block previously was converting your current block into spell block. You're now going to be gaining raw flat spell block. This is going to be a pretty big buff for a lot of people. To give you a brief example, if we were to look at the passive skill tree, we don't know exactly how this will work, but let's say that this 2% and this 5% conversion got buffed. So this is actually just raw, but if this got buffed up and then, going down here or looking over here on the other block notes, if they just added more raw spell block, that could be kind of cool. And also, depending on the wording, you might now be able to get raw spell block onto, builds which previously couldn't block, say bow builds, for example. So I think I really like this change. We just need to see the raw implementation. And having more spell mitigation is going to be very important going into Delve. We've seen some nerfs and some buffs to movement skills. I like the nerf to shield charge. TLDR, Brightbeat got nerfed. It will still be very good for stuff like Leap Slam, and you'll still want to scale a whole lot of attack speed, but they've made shield charge a bit worse. This will open up more interesting options, but I worry this will push a lot of casters into just using Whirling Blades instead, killing some of the more interesting options. So I like it, but unless they change other things, still expect to see people whirling about. And onto the Flame Dash and Lightning Warp buffs. These are very substantial buffs. I actually dislike the implementation of both of these buffs, though. Again, I like the end result. I just feel like it could be done slightly better. But until we see the final numbers, I can't say for sure. So for Flame Dash specifically, they're lowering the cast speed slightly, increasing its maximum range, and they're reducing the cooldown, and it gains cooldown recovery as the gem levels. Now, without having the specific numbers here, it's hard to really evaluate. One of the raw statements I'm just going to say, though, is let's say that they make the cooldown recharge so quickly that you can nearly spam it or basically spam it, then why even have a cooldown in charges? If you're ignoring the cooldown, what's the point of having a cooldown? That was the same argument I used when they made traps not have cooldowns. I said I would rather they remove the cooldowns completely rather than make them recharge so quickly they may as well not exist. Increasing the range of it is great. For any build which currently use Flame Dash, having this and then instant phase run, this might be enough to make stuff like staffs, etc. feel a bit less wanky. The main case where Flame Dash will still feel bad is when 3 Flame Dashes aren't enough. So for certain maps you need to backtrack or whatever, lab running, or in the case of your Flame Dash hitting an obstacle and not doing what you want to do with it, it could still feel pretty meh. So I like the end result, but I would rather they nerf the cast speed and all that stuff and remove the charges, then gave it like crazy cast speed, crazy range, but still overly limiting cooldown. So without knowing the final like cooldown numbers, we don't know if this is, for example, having, you know, a 5% or a 50% reduction in cooldown. We can't give the final notice there. And then as for the Lightning Warp is having a better cast time, and they've also put some more reduced duration into the gem, which scales as it levels. Now that's all great. I still think one of the biggest issues with a Lightning Warp is the fact that it scales with movement speed. A lot of people don't know that Lightning Warp does scale with movement speed. Currently, the only skills which don't scale with movement speed are Leap Slam, Whirling Blades, and I guess you could argue stuff like Flicker Strike. There isn't really the spell equivalent of that. I guess you'd also say Blink Carry, but yeah, there isn't really the spell equivalent. I think it'd be great if they just like buff Lightning Warp and then made it no longer scale with movement speed. The reason why I would like that is, for example, with Whirling Blades builds, I really like the fact that you don't need to use a Quicksilver Flask. You could then be like, do I want to play a Flame Dash and a Phase Run build or a Lightning Warp build? Well, I don't want to use a Quicksilver Flask in this build, so I'll go Lightning Warp instead. Or I want to use Comb's Roots or a pair of unique boots which don't have the movement speed roll. So yeah, that's why I'd really like them to, you know, separate movement speed from Lightning Warp scaling. I think that'd be far more interesting from a build making point of view. And I think it would open up more thinking when it comes to making your builds. Because a lot of builds are kind of like, you have to use a Diamond Flask, you have to use a Quicksilver Flask. And having more skills not scale with movement speed, you know, kind of messes up the meta a little bit. I would like that more personally. Yeah. On to the Sundar change. So they said that Sundar's very powerful for leveling, and they wanted to nerf that. And they've done that by nerfing the AoE by 20%. There's a guy who posted a picture of it on Reddit. They basically just they've circumcised Sundar. They just sort of trimmed the tip a little bit. I know that's not how it works. I'm going to stick with that analogy. That doesn't really make sense to me, because it's still going to be a very powerful leveling tool. They've just sort of nerfed it for mapping. And basically, when you're leveling, it's very rare that you're leveling and you've got crazy map density and you need to like get all of the crazy AoE possible. By just sort of trimming the top off it, it's still going to have crazy damage for leveling. It's just going to feel worse in maps. So Sundar is still going to be a very, very powerful leveling tool. but obviously it will feel slightly worse in some of the more dense areas. Dan points out in chat, the density is actually pretty OP from Act 6 to 10. But yeah, I just feel like it's still going to be very powerful for that early leveling chunk, at least until, you know, Act 5, Act 6, once you get your Crawl Lab rolling. I feel like they should have done a less damage thing early, because Sundar is very good at endgame still if you're speed clearing, but I feel like it wasn't, like, a problem skill for endgame, especially with Delve coming up, you know, trying to push people away from clear speed a little bit, and more about, like, build damage and stuff. I just feel like they've kind of nerfed the wrong bit of Sundar. They could have had it so it had less AoE early, then it gained AoE with levels. I don't know, it just seems a bit awkward. On to Kinetic Blast. Some people saying Kinetic Blast is dead. I think Kinetic Blast is still going to be really strong. They've nerfed the damage by 10%, and they've also stopped it from overlapping on raw single target. And when you KB into wall, sometimes it won't even, like, spawn the little explosions. So that sounds terrible, right? KB will still be very good map clear in, like, open maps. For open maps, will still be great. KB mines in particular will be amazing for open maps. For very tight indoor maps, it will be obviously a lot weaker, and it'll be a lot weaker on single target, you know, using knockback, cheesing bosses into walls. But Wander's already had access to Barrage, which is insane single target, so basically you just need to focus more on Barrage now and less on KB for single target. And this opens up more options to Power Siphon, Val Power Siphon. So KB will still very much be a thing, but it is much weaker than it was before because they killed, you know, the whole AoE crushing aspect of it. So I'm fine with the change. On to the Val Solve prevention. This is another one where I know what they went for, and I like what they went for. I just don't like the implementation. Basically, what they've done here is Val skills that are affected by duration modifiers. So let's use the example of Val Righteous Fire linked to increase duration. By scaling all the duration on it, it will also scale the soul prevention timer, so it'll take longer for you to be able to recharge and get to use it again. Basically, they don't want supports running around doing crazy uptime on impurities, Val Haste, Val Grace. They don't want people running around with super Val Righteous Fire, etc. That I agree with. This, however, nerfs a lot of sort of niche skills, which were currently fine or already weak. And unless they individually tune those in particular, I really dislike it. To give you a few examples, Val Clarity. Val Clarity served a very good purpose. You could be like, okay, I'm playing a Mind Over Matter build. It's defensive, but it's also kind of utility. You could just be playing a build which has very high mana costs. And through clever usage, you could bypass having to use a mana flask and so on and so forth. That kind of gets killed by this, which I really dislike. Another example would be something like Val Blight. So Blight is very powerful as like a utility skill for chaos skills. We're seeing a lot of new chaos skills coming out. So having a utility Val Blight setup sounds amazing. Val Blight already had an extremely unnecessarily long lockout timer for no reason. And they've made that lockout timer even longer if you're going for a Blight increased duration setup. So I really dislike it for a few specific examples. Really dislike that. And then, you know, they've buffed Earthquake, Val Earthquake here, but they've maybe nerfed Val Earthquake if you're going for crazy duration based. So yeah, it's a bit wonky. It feels like they were trying to like nerf a few specific things, but then they just nerfed everything. This we already knew about it changing, so that's fine. And on to the passive tree changes. So I mostly agree with a lot of this, but again, I dislike some of the implementation. They've added some cool new stuff to Templar. They've added some like Scourge-like minion damage scaling you. That all sounds really, really cool. But they've changed the Witch starting area. And the Witch starting area for a long time has been kind of like, eh. And they've killed it. So what they did is they've moved the mana skills to be alongside the energy shield path. We don't know exactly what that means. What I believe that means is this ES path here. I believe they've added another pathway here for the mana. So basically these nodes have moved up here, and these mana nodes now do minion damage. I really dislike that. So this left bit of the Witch starting area is pretty weak. So the spell damage nodes aren't very powerful, and the cast speed nodes are very weak in contrast to, for example, you know, shadow cast speed. So these nodes have never really been that strong. And there are a lot of builds which go Witch, which don't want any of these nodes. Now, the mana nodes are incredibly powerful and very underrated for Mind Over Matter builds. If you're playing an Ignite build, it'd be quite common that you'd go through the mana nodes if you're Ignite Mom. rather than going through these nodes, unless, for example, you're playing Incinerate and you really need the cast speed. And by moving these nodes up here, to be, let's just say, these nodes there, you've basically added more skill points required onto a build. It's a substantial nerf there. What rather they did is they kept these nodes the same, and they buffed these cast speed nodes. And then these spell damage nodes actually became the minion nodes. So if you had, like, cast speed, minion damage, cast speed, so like cast speed, and then you could pick between big cast speed, minion damage, or have it so that you have, like, here a three-way travel setup, have a three-way travel setup of ES, mana, or minion damage. Another thing which would be kind of cool about having mana ES here and then, like, cast speed, minion damage here. For any spell caster, you still use the cast speed, right? So you haven't, like, been nerfed, but you've gained more quality of life by buffing and, like, cast speed up. You've gained more clear speed, etc. And if you actually look at the minion nodes, here they have damage, here they have defense. So it would just be, like, sort of symmetrical. So you'd have the defense here, and you'd have the damage here, rather than, like, damage, defense, damage, defense. It's just a bit awkward. Yeah, any Mind Over Matter build kind of got fucked a little bit. Attack builds kind of got fucked a little bit. It's always been awkward that, you know, Ignite, for example, Elemental builds, for example, didn't have good starting nodes. They've decided to rework Witch, and then they still don't have good starting nodes. So expect to see a lot of routing awkwardly around the sides for a few builds. Obviously, summoners are very happy, so good for summoners, but bad for anyone who isn't a summoner. And it's like a half change. And because they've done this, they probably won't go back to Witch again. So it's just kind of awkward. It's just kind of awkward. I don't really like it. But yeah. The Templar stuff, I agree with. The Templar stuff sounds really cool. The Guardian stuff sounds cool. Until we see it, we can't say. Pathfinder stuff we've seen. I like it. I think it's very powerful. I'm curious to see how it will make Assassin feel in contrast. And the Pathfinder stuff seems very powerful. But it looks powerful. It looks good. It doesn't look completely stupid or completely broken. So I kind of like it. This is one of my favorite things here. So they've added a little thing where previously anything which was ailments with attack skills while wielding a weapon of their type, so, you know, ailment damage while wielding a bow is going to be changed to damage over time. Now, depending on the exact wording here, this is actually huge. So if it's just like, you know, increased damage over time while wielding a two-handed weapon, if that's just the thing there, you can certainly use that to scale Corsac Arrow, Decay, as they say here there, but also you can start using it to scale stuff like Righteous Fire. You can use it to scale Scorching Ray. They have made a few quite interesting changes by nerfing Shield Charge, by introducing some powerful new staffs, having, you know, +3 bows, if they ever make a cool quiver. You could suddenly then start running around playing, like, bow or staff, Righteous Fire, Scorching Ray builds, and you suddenly have way more options, you know, on the skill tree. Essence Drain is another obvious one. Even Death's Oath, the chess piece. So I really like that. Adds up more interesting things to the skill tree. You know, doing +3 Scorching Ray, you know, Soul First, whatever the quiver is, the Energy Shield Recharge Occultist. I think it's really cool. It's very, very powerful. Yeah. Another big thing which has changed, which I skipped over, is Guardian will no longer have the instant Warcry. They're actually making those some clusters. So there'll be one cluster roughly here, which will give you, like, a steroid on using a Warcry. So when you use a Warcry, you gain, like, attack speed, cast speed, movement speed. Very powerful. And then there'll be one here, which will give you the instant Warcries. Fucking amazing. So if you're doing, like, a, you know, Corsac Arrow Pathfinder or Corsac Arrow something in this part of the skill tree, you're gonna want life. And you come down this way, grab some juicy life, grab some juicy life, and so you have instant Warcries. That's going to make Abyssal Cry feel really good. I think one of the favorite builds I played during Abyss League was a Abyssal Cry Corsac Arrow Berserker. I really enjoyed it. Obviously, this was before the Berserker rework. But yeah, having instant Warcries, could be really, really powerful. Really, really like it. It's also going to be nice stuff like Cyclone, Dibion's Dirge. It's just really, really nice having it. Obviously, Abyssal Cry is bad AoE, but you get 50% AoE with Chaos Skills on Pathfinder, hey? Get some juicy AoE. Get a nice bit of AoE off of Deadeye. I don't know, I just really like having those instant Warcries there. and expect me to try and come up with some slightly janky build which gets both the Warcry things. Maybe that'll be my League starter or one of my early builds for Delve. But yeah, I really like the Warcry change. Really love the instant cast. The instant cast is, for me, the biggest thing. The biggest thing going into this new patch. I fucking love it. Now, going down here, they've changed it so corpse explosions can be blocked and dodged. This is both a good and a bad thing. It's a nerf for quite a few builds when it comes to stuff like Hall of Grandmasters. It's a buff for, like, character defense, which means I like and dislike it. So I like buffs to character defense, but I dislike nerfs to explosive arrow. I actually mentioned I wanted to see some, like, kind of reworks to explosive arrow. I know explosive arrow is, like, good. Like, it's fine. I still feel like it's a bit behind other skills at the moment, and I feel like what makes explosive arrow really good in its current state is abusing broken uniques, like impulsors and the stormfire ring, etc. If you take away, like, all the crazy broken things, explosive arrow itself isn't that great. So yeah, I kind of dislike this one specific thing here. And then Frostbomb is now, you know, better at mitigating Hall of Grandmasters because it now also chunks Energy Shield regen. So yeah, a lot of things in here that I really like. Not too many things that I, like, strongly disagree with, even though I'm quite negative for this post. I just don't like the implementation. Like, I agree with the desired result. I just don't really like how they went about it. But again, until we see the final patch notes, it's hard to really say exactly how everything will go. But, you know, the main things that people are going to be interested for: Arc, Ellie hit nerfs. Will we see substantial buffs to self-cast itself? Will we see any tweaks to maybe certain ascendancies? Berserker, by the way. But yes, I'm Tarke. Have a good day. Bye-bye.